Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And today we are thrilled to welcome a legendary comedic writer, six-time Emmy Award winner, a songwriter, actor, subject of a documentary dedicated to him, has written for Bette Midler, Richard Pryor, Donny and Marie, and really, if we listed all his accolades, we'd be here forever and never get to speak with him. So please help us welcome Bruce Vilanch. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us
today.
Thank you.
That might be a better idea. Just list my accolades. I'll tune in.
Well, you've had such a legendary career, and we're going to try to get it as much as possible. But to start with, your mom had been a former Broadway showgirl. How much of an influence on you was she? And did she, put you in that showbiz bug that, at an early age?
Well, I don't think it was conscious on her part. It was just me. I would make faces in the mirror, and I would insist on entertaining when people were over. And I was captivated by the movie ads and newspapers, and I was a television freak. So I think they picked up on those cues, and because she had kind of given up her dream career, which is basically being a showgirl, to marry a doctor, which was probably another dream career. She enjoyed the fact that I liked it, and I exhibited some talent, and I got some jobs as a child actor. And she loved all of that. She was that, but she wasn't like Mama Rose. It wasn't like when's my turn? For me. It wasn't that. My father loved show business. My father was an optometrist, but he loved musicals. He invested in them, so it was all around our house. But it wasn't anything that was. It wasn't a conscious influence. I mean, once I was plugged into it myself, I realized, they were supportive. They enabling. In fact, their only concern was that I would be able to make a living. So they said, "Well, write for newspapers; they'll never go away."
Oh yeah! Wow!
Don't know.
Wow!
Don't know. The wisdom of the elders. What can I say?
Was she like a stage mom who took you around to all your auditions?
Well, yeah, but she wasn't one of those pushy stage mothers, like Rose Hovick, who was Gypsy Rose Lee's mother. No, absolutely. I mean, she was kind of she was entranced by the whole thing, by being in the showbiz, and but it was never a pushy thing, and all the money went into Bruce's college fund. So it was never. It wasn't. She wasn't living her career through me like a lot of those women are.
Yeah.
Or the ones who get written about.
Well, I was reading about you. So you worked for the Chicago Tribune, writing reviews and entertainment things. And so one of your first big breaks, you wrote about Bette Midler, and she noticed something that you wrote about her. And so how did that come about? And did you just get a call one day? Hi, this is Bette.
I was writing for the Chicago Tribune, and she played a club called Mr. Kelly's, which was a very hip club when there was a nightclub circuit. I mean, not just a gay nightclub circuit, but the old school nightclub circuit. It was a very hip room, and she was on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof playing one of the daughters. Right. And her manager got her this gig at Kelly's, and I went and reviewed it. Actually, I went because I knew him, and he called and said, "I've got this girl playing Kelly's. Would you go see her?" And so I went, and I thought she was fabulous, and I wrote a review of it. And then I called her and did an interview with her to plug the show. And she said, after the interview appeared, she said, "You're a very funny writer." And I said, "Well, you're funny. You should talk more on stage." And she said, "You got any lines?" And that was the beginning. And it was only 50 years ago.
Wow.
And it continues to this day. So,
Oh my God.
There it is.
Well, did you just write material for her, or did you go on the road with her?
I did both. I
Oh,
wrote. I would on the weekends. I would go out. Well, once she had a record deal, she was playing clubs around the country, and I would go and I was in Chicago, so I could get pretty much anywhere easily. So I would visit her on the weekends, and then once she recorded, Atlantic put her on an actual tour in which she played theaters. Then I would do the same thing. And after 5 years of this, I started writing for a lot of other people because they knew me through her, and they would come through town. I'd interview them, and I would start writing for them.
Wow.
So after 5 years, the paper said, you do live in Chicago. You can't be on the road all the time. We're not paying you for that. And right at that point, one of the acts that Bette had started, the Manhattan Transfer, which is celebrating their 50th year. And tonight, actually, I don't know when this will show up, but tonight is their last concert ever. They're retiring.
Oh,
after
wow. I
50
didn't
years.
realize that.
And I'm introducing them on stage and telling the story of how we all started.
oh,
They brought me out to Hollywood in 1975 to write a TV series, which was a summer replacement show for Cher had the regular time slot. And
Oh, I'm gonna ask you about Cher. Yeah.
I was
Later.
also writing for her and for Sonny, and for her with Sonny, her without
Oh, yeah.
Sonny without her. Very complicated. But and so that brought me to LA, and I started doing variety television.
Well, so
So it all began with the divine. What can I tell you?
but so at that point you moved out to LA. I mean, did you know anyone there at all, or just like how?
Well, yeah, I had an agent and I had a job, which is I was 2 steps ahead of everybody else who moves to LA.
oh, wow.
Because
Okay.
I always say to them, don't come here unless you have an agent and a job, because you need some kind of footing. Otherwise, you're just another person who's landed saying, look at me, I'm fabulous. But they all want it. The first thing they say is, you got any film on yourself, or you got anything I can read? And it's very helpful if you have somebody who can do that for you, and you actually have something that they can refer to, that somebody is already invested in you by paying you money to work. So what was the original question? I'm going on.
No, just how nerve-wracking is it to just go out to LA? I mean, just like that.
I was ready. I was writing in addition to Bette, I was writing for Lily Tomlin then, and Joan Rivers,
Wow.
and Flip Wilson, and Richard Pryor, and George Carlin, and a bunch of people. So I had work out here. I came out with the transfer job, and then that led me to some other variety TV jobs like Donny and Marie, before variety died, before cable killed variety. The combination of cable and SNL killed primetime variety shows.
Well, didn't you get a part in Mahogany? Now, how did
that was in Chicago? That was before I left.
Oh, it was.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mahogany
okay.
was shot in Chicago and Rome, and it was being directed by Tony Richardson, who was a brilliant director. But he was under the mistaken impression he was making a Tony Richardson picture, and in fact, he was making a Diana Ross picture. And it was Diana's. It was her second movie. I mean, she'd made a huge splash with Lady Sings the Blues, and Berry Gordy, who ran Motown and was running her, basically, didn't like what Tony was doing, so he fired him and took over as director. And if you know Mahogany, it's about a shop girl in Chicago who becomes a fashion designer and winds up in Rome being a high fashion model. And Berry decided they had to get the story out of Chicago fast. Or Chicago ain't pretty, he kept saying. Chicago ain't pretty. Rome's pretty. So I had one scene. I had a couple of scenes, but they wound up on the floor because we had to get her to Rome right away. So there's one scene left in Mahogany, which is me turning her down for a job, and it's an immortal scene. I had to learn how to sew because I was playing big fashion East. I couldn't sew, and so I wound up sewing my shirt to her dress, so that when by accident, because there was overlap, and I was sewing the two things, and then I got up to leave, and I pulled her out of the shot with me, so we had to redo that. But we had a great time doing it, and then I thought, well, nobody will remember this. And then I met many years later, I met RuPaul, and RuPaul said, "Oh, you're in Mahogany, 32 minutes in." And I looked at her and I said, "Not for nothing is he RuPaul.
Yeah.
32 minutes. He knows his stuff." And I wound up working for him as well, so writing for him. So
Did you originally? I mean, did you want to be an actor at one point instead?
Yeah, I always wanted to be an actor, but I was too young to play the parts I could play. I was a child actor, and I had a deep voice, and I was born 40. I looked older, and I was competing against the genuine article, the real deal. So I wasn't getting cast, and that was when my parents said, you seem to have a talent for writing. Why don't you write about this stuff? And that's how that all began in high school, actually.
Wow.
So, but yeah, I always wanted to act, and I was always juggling, but I mean, the writing career, knock wood, happened. So I would do small acting parts and things. And then after I was on Hollywood Squares, on television every night. And when you're on TV every night, you become sort of famous. And so I auditioned for Hairspray to play the mother. And I did 2 years of that, the year on the road and the year on Broadway.
Oh.
So I could actually vest my actor's equity money, finally.
Wanted to ask you about Hairspray quickly. That just before we get to the other things you're writing with too. How was that? How did that come about that you got into that role?
What, Hairspray?
Hairspray, yeah.
Well, I was on TV every night, and I mean, I'm sure they were looking for somebody who was kind of a name to follow Harvey Fierstein, at least do that role on the road. And my agent said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah." I had gone. My friends Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman had written the score, and so I'd gone up to Seattle to see it when they tried it out. And Harvey was brilliant, but in the back of my head, I thought, "Gee, I could play this. I can sing as well as Harvey. I could sing that well, and I could almost dance as well as Harvey. He's very light-footed, but." And I thought I could do it, but I didn't think it was real, And then the show became this huge hit on Broadway, and they mounted this tour, and they said, "Well, you're known all over the country. Why don't you come in and show us what you can do?" So I auditioned a couple of times, and Scott came over to me after the second audition and said, "Do you really want to do this? Because they like you." Okay, I'll do it. And so for 2 years, I put on, the house dress and the 35-pound fat suit and the 40-pound beaded dress and the 2 3/4-inch fat lady high heels, and the tits of life. I mean, I was, couldn't see my feet. My entire center of gravity shifted. So it was. I do it again in a minute. It was fabulous. It's a great show. It's a great show.
Well, we want to get into your television work. So
yes, I can see by the backdrop.
But the Paul Lynde Halloween Special, which was such a bizarre show. I mean, you had Kiss and Tim Conway, Billy Barty, Margaret Hamilton, Donny and Marie, Roz Kelly, who played Pinky Tuscadero. Such an eclectic cast. How did you get involved in that?
Well, those were the days of television specials, but MTV and cable and SNL were quietly killing off Variety, but this was Variety's last gasp. And in those days, there were a lot of weird specials that were done, mostly because there were Variety performers who could host them. But also they were great cross-plugging things for the network. So ABC had a deal with Paul to do specials because they realized that he couldn't carry a series, but he was a great flavor to put in every a couple of times a year in the special. And of course, the specials needed themes after a while because if you said the Paul Lynde Special, they'd figure, well, we've seen that already, so it has to be something else. And he had done a Christmas special. It was the night before Christmas. It was kind of a story. And I don't know if it did well. I forget if it did well or not, but they thought Halloween was much more suitable to him. So because he was already a witch, he was on Bewitched, he was Uncle Arthur, so he already had that street cred. So we put this together, and Pinky was on Happy Days, which was another ABC show, and we had Florence from the Brady Bunch, Florence Henderson, who was Carol Brady, the legendary Carol Brady, and then I don't think the rest of them. I mean, Billy Hayes was Witchy Poo on ABC Saturday mornings.
Puff and stuff, right?
Yeah, Puff and stuff. So it was a lot of that. That's how that stuff happens, and then the idea we needed a couple of witches to be Paul's sisters, and when Margaret Hamilton and I had met, she was doing this quite a career thing. Of course, she was the Wicked Witch of the West originally, but she was a character actress. And when I met her, she was doing a Sondheim show. She was doing a little night music.
Wow.
The tour with Gene Simmons, not from Kiss, but the other Gene Simmons, the actress, the movie star. And so she was like, doing a serious thing. And we said, can you come back and be the Wicked Witch of the West? And she was delighted to get into the green makeup and do all of that. Meanwhile, we had the other Gene Simmons on the show. We had Kiss, which was their network television debut. And so that contributed to the big rating and to the young demographic, which was exactly what
just amazing. And you can still watch that on YouTube. It's still on there.
Yeah. Well, all of these things, I do these podcasts, and people ask me about that show and the Star Wars Holiday Special and the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. And I realized that, these things that if we'd known 40 years later, people would be talking about them, we might have paid closer attention. So I thought there's a book in this, and I have sold one. It's called It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time. And it is about all of these shows and a couple of movies and a couple of Broadway things that I did. It'll be out next year.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Oh man.
So, and you'll hear the story, what I just told you, but with much more garnishment.
Well, I do want to ask you about Paul Lynde. As a kid, I loved him, and it was only later on as an adult that I read all these other things about him. So we've had on several guests, who are not complimentary, and for one, he's not a big fan of the Jews. So what?
No, he did not care for the Jews, but he kept that under his hat until he had a cocktail. I mean, he was great on one cocktail, 2 cocktails, it all came out. He was a Nazi high command.
Oh my gosh! So what was your experience with him then?
That was part of it. I mean, we were as friendly as you could get with him, because I was gay, and so and I was out, and of course he was never allowed to be out. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was before it was popular to come out. I was just never in, and he was. And he, but I wasn't on TV the way he was on TV. And we had a good time. He was never terribly happy. He was a bitter guy because he had come up in New York with Woody Allen and Mel Brooks, 2 Jews, and they had become big movie stars. And he hadn't, and that was because he was a flavor, and he didn't write his own stuff. He was a clever writer when he actually sat down to write, but he didn't really create stuff for himself. So he was not happy. He was very happy when the light was on and he was performing. But yeah, and he was a terrible, terrible drunk. I mean, when he got drunk, it was just it was Stalingrad. It was just,
That's what I read.
No holds barred. It was bad. So it was difficult to be too friendly with him.
Well, you mentioned you knew Margaret Hamilton. Did you have a lot of interaction with her during the show?
Oh yeah, we got friendly during the show. The show took about 10 days to shoot because it was very elaborate for one of those things, especially lots of sets and stuff. And she was great fun. She lived in Gramercy Park, New York, and she had a key to the park. And so when I was in New York, I would go see her, and we would go she'd pack a picnic lunch, and we'd go sit in the park and feed the birds. and she was really funny. I mean, she told me great stories about Metro and working with W.C. Fields, and she was,
yes.
she was in My Little Chickadee with W.C. Fields and Mae West, which was like, she said, watching them upstage each other. I mean, it's easy to upstage on stage. It's literally you step upstage and the audience has to look at you, and your whoever you're working with has to turn around to look at you. But it's hard to do that on camera. You have to figure out something to do that will draw their eye away from and they apparently, the two of them were hard at it, and we had many incidents of those things.
What about Billy Barty?
She was a real studio. I mean, she was not a movie star. She was a contract player, and she was never out of work. Because when you had a contract at Metro or any place, she was at Universal later, I think, they just put you in whatever they were shooting.
It's so funny with her because whenever I see her appearances now, like on YouTube and other things, she looks like the sweetest woman that playing this. And she's known for like one of the most evil people in cinema.
That her signature part was playing a witch, and when she's Agnes Gulch or whatever Agatha Gulch, whatever her name is, as the school teacher, she's even worse. I mean, because she's not a witch; she's just a terrible woman who takes a dog away from a child. I mean, awful. It doesn't get lower than that.
What are your memories of Billy Barty?
Billy Barty he was hilarious. He was in private life. He was married to the same woman, and they had a raft of children. And he was like a family man. But his performing persona was he was a dirty old man. He was a lewd, a little person, and so that was hysterical. I mean, he was always going around and chasing skirt all over the place. If he could reach it, he would chase it. And there was a famous story about Julie Newmar, who was a statuesque beauty, and Billy went over to her and looked at her and said, "I want to go up on you."
Okay, I've heard many variations.
And Julie said, "If you do, and I hear about it."
Oh my God!
And he would tell that story a lot, and Julie confirmed it to me years later.
Oh, that's great.
He was, the thing was, he was a professional sight gag. You just had to get out of his way.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I mean, and if he couldn't do anything else, he'd just kick you in the shin.
Yeah.
Because he could reach that, and it was bad. I worked with a lot of little people. I worked with Sid and Marty Krofft, and of course, they had Munchkin. They kept all the Munchkins employed forever. Yeah. Patty Maloney and Billy Barty were the king and queen of little people. And
well, I had the honor of working with Jerry Marin and his wife Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah.
He was my stand-in in a Disney film I did, and his wife was Kim Richards' stand-in, who played my sister, and it was just like great stories. My God, there was so much fun.
What was that movie? Hang on.
Escape to Witch Mountain. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, was that Bette Davis, or was she in the other one?
Bette Davis was in the sequel. It was Escape to Witch Mountain was the first one, released in '75, and then I worked very closely with Betty, which was an amazing honor in the second film, and she was a hoot and a half, an absolute.
She was hysterical. I knew her a little bit.
Yeah, but anyway, back to that show. It was such a perfect '70s variety show, and I was a huge fan of variety shows growing up. I was like, obviously they had to have their day and things had to move on, but I miss them. I look forward to them every time they came on. It had a little bit of everything. Any other stories you remember about that show?
About the
Paul Lynde.
Yeah, the Paul Lynde Halloween.
Well, yeah. When Kiss came in, Paul had no idea who Kiss was. But they just announced their retirement, so I guess it was. So he came in to watch a rehearsal, and they were already had put the makeup on, but not the outfits. And so and he was kind of looking at it. And Gene Simmons, of course, had this very long tongue, and hey, there was a lot of that in Kiss. And I was sitting with Paul watching it, and he said, "I want to meet him." And so I told Paul I told Gene, I said, "Paul wants to meet you." And Gene said, "It's the tongue, isn't it?" The tongue always gets them.
Well, speaking of Paul, you have the Making the Yuletide Gay, a very special Paul Lynde Christmas thing.
Well, that came about because there was such affection for the Paul Lynde Halloween Special that a bunch of guys said, "Let's do the Paul Lynde Christmas Special that he never did, because the one that he did was fairly tame, but we wanted to do one in the spirit of the Paul Lynde Halloween Special." And so we put this together, and it's everybody on it is dead. It's B. Arthur and Liberace and Tab Hunter and Sal Mineo. These are all the guests. They're all dead. And it's very, very gay. I mean, it's Make the Yuletide Gay. I think the title kind of explains it all. But it is as faithful a replica as we could do of the kind of thing that was being done in the 70s. And in fact, we tell people, just it's a time capsule. Take yourself back to the 70s when all this was happening. And a guy named Michael Arrington, who's been doing Paul in Vegas and various places for years, plays Paul, and he is Paul pretty much to the T. Younger than Paul, but he is Paul. So it's a lot of fun, and it's dropped, I think, on Amazon now.
Right, it's out now. That's what I wanted to ask about. Right,
this is out now. Yeah, it's come along. 40 years in the making, folks. Thank you. Touch of Sophie Tucker for you.
Well,
the other Sophie Tucker, not the rock band. It's so confusing these days. It's just so confusing. There's a rock band named Sophie Tucker. I mean, and I casually mention Sophie Tucker, and people look at me like, the band, quizzically, like,
yeah,
the band. They do Yiddish jokes. The band, what?
Well, you mentioned the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, and we've had Sid Croft on the show who spoke a little bit about that. How did you get involved in it?
Well, because after Manhattan Transfer got incredible reviews. Critics loved us. But nobody watched. It was on summer, and we were opposite Disney, and so the ratings were not great. And I thought, well, it's done. And I kept saying the show is just too hip. It's just too hip. And I thought, I'll never work again. I'm too hip. And I knew Florence from Broadway. I knew her from New York, and she was married to a guy who ran the Schubert Empire for them, and had moved to LA to open the Schubert Theater. And so she was living out here, and they had 4 kids. And she wanted to do something that would take her off the road. And so when this opportunity arose, and I happened to be with her having dinner, and I was telling her about, they keep saying, "You're too hip for the Captain and Tennille. We love you, but they can't do this material. Like, you're not adaptable, So she said, "Do what I did. Do the Brady Bunch. No one will ever say you're too hip again." So I went in, and they said, "Okay, you can do it," because they were looking. I don't know what they were thinking. They were thinking they would do this weird. That it was somehow going to be very meta. I mean, the template for the show was the Jack Benny program. Jack Benny's show was about Jack Benny, who had a show every week, and it would be about putting together the show. So it would be at home, and there was always a guest star like Marilyn Monroe, who would be his neighbor. And they would discuss they would have a sketch where they were discussing what they would do, and then Marilyn would have something that they would write for her to do on the Jack Benny. So a show within a show. And so they said that the Brady Bunch will be an act that has a television variety show, but they will have a home life that will be one part of the show, and then they will have the variety show that will be the other part of the show.
The Brady's just have Bob Hope coming over for yes.
It was like Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett are coming over for tea. for a weenie roast. They lived at the beach. But they had an Olympic-sized pool next to the beach because Sid had Donny and Marie. He'd had ice skaters. There was a skating rink. Opening number was always the ice. They were called the Ice Angels, but the Mormons made us change it because apparently Angels is no NG in Mormon lexicon. So so instead of ice skaters, we had water ballet. So there were like all these mermaids we had. In fact, the first meeting of Sid and Marty just passed last week, but the relationship was defined by this meeting where Sid said, "I see a pool, a lagoon, and a waterfall, and 36 mermaids." And Marty said, 18 mermaids. And that was the relationship. That was it. That was the thing. And so they had a water ballet, and we opened the show with a water ballet. And
wow,
there was a degree. I have to say, this was like 1976, and so a lot of people were chemically altered. And so there was a degree, like all of their shows, like Puff and Stuff and Lidsville and all that, they were all thinly veiled, hooch dreams, and so this was an attempt to do that. I mean, the Mormons would never let them get away with it on Donny and Marie. The Osmond family were, they had strict rules. They were very devout. But on the Brady Bunch, no one really gave a rat's ass. So let's try it. Let's just go with it and see what happens.
Well, Robert Reed famously complained a lot during the regular Brady Bunch. How was he on the variety show?
He was, he was out of his element. What can I say? He was out of his comfort zone. I mean, the Brady kids had an act. They would do state fairs and things like that. And they weren't all musically talented, but Barry and Maureen would cover the heavy stuff, and they would all kind of follow suit. And of course, Florence was multi-talented from the theater and whatnot. And Bob was a dramatic actor who was also a comedic actor, but he was not a musical actor. So he was a little gun shy of everything. Had to be talked into everything, but he was always happy working with the kids because from the original show he became sort of a surrogate dad because a lot of them did have those kinds of pushy stage mother families that were more interested in the dollar than they were in the kid, in my humble opinion. And Bob put himself up as like the guardian, the sentry at the gate, making sure that these kids were not being taken advantage of, because he had no kids of his own. I mean, he was deeply in the closet, but he had a fatherly instinct, and so he was happy to be back in that role on the show, because even though they weren't like that young, they were still minors, most of them, so he could still play that part, and that I think kept him going. But he really was sort of terrified when he talked about it in later years. He said, "Oh, it was the most fun I ever had." I remember him having a lot of fun. I mean, we had to talk him into stuff, but I guess once he was in the costume, what happened when they made the Brady Bunch movie, which were those movies that were spoofs of the Brady Bunch, but when they came out, Nickelodeon, which was a division of Paramount, had the rights to all the Brady. They began showing the Brady Bunch Variety Hour on Nick at Night, and I would get these calls from people saying, "Dude, I just saw this show with the dad from the Brady Bunch dressed up as Carmen Miranda, and your name is on it, dude. What the fuck? What?" So I had to explain,
That's awesome.
Here's how that happened. And of course, again, this led me to the book explaining these things in much more detail.
I'm sure. Well, what are some of your memories of Rip Taylor? And is it true that Ann B. Davis did not get along with them.
Oh no, they did not get along at all. Well, Ann B was, she was a committed Christian, and she was deep in the closet herself. And Rip was deep in the closet, but Rip was this out there, outrageous personality, and he was a real people pleaser, which he didn't need to please Ann B. Just show up, know your lines, hit the marks, and she'll do what she does. She didn't really want to be his pal, and he was hell bent on having her like him, and so he was all over. And of course, the way he did that was he was always in your face, with exploding cigars and that kind of stuff. And then, he was, and she just like couldn't take it. She'd run to the farthest corner of the stage. And the joke was, he played their manager, who was their next door neighbor, and he had eyes for Alice. And in the original show, there had been Sam the Butcher. But was never really delineated too closely, her relationship with Sam the Butcher. And I don't think Alice ever had a day off. She was always in that house. She was always doing everything. So so he was always over there, and he was always kind of coming on to her. And we wrote that as close as we could without crossing the line. But it just bothered her a lot that she had to play that, she had to play like she was interested or not interested or whatever. But she was a real pro. I mean, she was absolutely a pro. And I mean, I would, Rip was a good friend of mine, but I mean, it was hard to take because he had created that character. It was partially Frank Morgan and The Wizard of Oz. The guy at the gate going, you can, and a lot of other stuff that he threw in. And he was fearless, but he when he was not in that character, he was kind of like didn't know which way to turn. He had become that guy.
So he's pigeonholed in that a little bit.
The what?
He was pigeonholed a little bit in that one.
Well, yeah. I mean, because that's such an extreme character,
Right. So, do want to ask, you brought it up, about the Osmonds. My daughter is a huge Donny Osmond fan, so she'd kill me if I didn't talk about them. So you worked on the Donny and Marie show, as you mentioned. So how did that happen that you came to that? Because on paper, and you touched upon it, it seems like such an odd pairing, you with the Mormons.
Yeah. Well, it does. I don't think. Well, I had the Brady Bunch under my belt, and so I came over. I didn't start with the show after Sid and Marty left. The Osmonds took over, and I came in on that thing because actually part of it was Marie was turning 18, and they wanted her to adult up. They wanted to make her. They realized what they had. Initially, they didn't want her to do anything because they wanted her to be a good Mormon wife, and she was a novelty in the act because they had 14 kids and one of them was a girl. So the novelty was that she was in the act, and they didn't want to continue that, but she did. She was quite ambitious, and and of course it took when Fred Silverman turned them into Donny and Marie. She was essential, but she was growing up, and they wanted people who could write to somewhat more of an adult thing. And I don't know. I mean, it was probably a foolhardy decision on their part, but they brought me in. I was one of those. And I mean, Ronnie Graham was working on the show, who was crazy. Uncle Dirt who was in the commercials, but Ronnie was, Ronnie and Paul had done New Faces, and Ronnie was a very crazy, sophisticated ad lib kind of comedy writer, and he was writing and directing the sketches and stuff. So, and Donny didn't want to do any of it. I mean, Donny really just he wanted to produce.
Right, he did not enjoy that.
No, he became an inventor. He had a lab, and he would tinker and invent things. And basically, I think it was to get away from the family. They would say, "Oh, don't bother him. He's in his lab." And I thought, perfect. He's created the perfect environment to avoid all of it. But and by the time we did the show, they were seasoned pros by the time I got there. So it made a kind of sense. But people say, well, how can you write like Donny and Marie and some? I said, look, Shakespeare wrote Titus Andronicus and Hamlet. I mean, he wrote the Comedy of Errors and he wrote Titus Andronicus. Give a girl a break. You have to have
that show.
You're allowed to have range.
Well, is the Donny Osmond story true that he told you looked like a Muppet?
Yeah.
Oh,
he did. When he first, and I did. I mean, I had a big beard. I looked like Animal. I had a big beard, and I was larger, and I had huge curly hair, which somehow got straight. And I was behind the desk. I had a huge desk that they built. They actually stole it from the anchor desk at KTLA because I was too large for a small desk. And I was sitting there drinking a Bloody Mary and smoking a cigarette, and he came in, and he looked at me and said, "You look just like a Muppet." And I said, "It's true. Jim Henson had his fist up my ass not 10 minutes ago." And there was a long pause, and he began laughing. That laugh you laugh when you're not supposed to laugh. And slowly inventing the moonwalk. He began walking backwards out of the office. But then we bonded because he would get his face sanded.
Well, it's such a popular show. I mean, really, I remember loving it too, but it was so popular. It was everywhere. It was like on the lunchboxes So what are some of your memories at that time, just doing the show in general?
Well, what happened was, Donny was a teen idol, and there's a very short lease on that. And shortly after he came up, Sean Cassidy was became an idol after that, and it began to cool down. And then CBS put The Incredible Hulk on opposite us, and that was the death knell because there was a new flavor in town, and our kids were aging out. So it was like all those variety shows. It was put together in a week, and it was a lot of work. It was especially because there were a lot of musical numbers. And most of them were originals. A lot of them were parodies. I mean, they were famous songs, well-known songs with new lyrics. And the finale would be always a gigantic theme thing. I mean, there's a famous Star Wars finale that sort of encouraged the holiday special. And so it was fun, but it was always, from the writing standpoint, there were so many things you couldn't do because of everything would be cleared by Salt Lake City, the elders. So, I mean, you couldn't mention, they don't take caffeine. You couldn't mention coffee. There were no coffee breaks on the Donny and Marie show. You couldn't mention caffeine. You couldn't mention liquor. You couldn't mention any kind of stimulants. There was just a list of stuff you couldn't say, to the point where the network censor had nothing to do. I mean, would have a disco number, and there'd be a disco ball, and she'd be counting the beats of the disco ball because evidently, when a light flashes at a certain rhythm, it can send an epileptic into a seizure. And so that was ultimately her job, was counting the beats on the disco ball, because she didn't want anybody suddenly foaming at the mouth because of the disco number on the Donny and Marie show. But so that always, anything a lot of things that we consider normal references you couldn't make on that show because they were so strict. We just kind of, but they were, as I said, Mother Osmond, Olive, Olive and George were the parents, and they had 14 kids, and we called George the Mount of Olives. And Olive, they were on the scene. Olive was she was a one-woman standards and practices. She would come in, she would tell people there's too much cleavage, She came into my office, and I was sitting there with the Bloody Mary and the cigarette, and she looked at me and she said, "Taking spirits, smoking cigarettes. Your body is a temple. How can you abuse your body in this way?" And I looked at her and I said, "Mixing meat with milk, you heathen." And she realized that we all have our religions and we all have our proscriptions. And that she wasn't going to win this one. She finally come up against one who was as devout as she. Although I wasn't, I was just using it as a dodge.
Right.
But eventually it was funny, and also I thought it was hysterical because she was heavy, and criticizing me for being heavy, I thought was pretty good. We used to have on the Christmas show. She was part of an all girl band. She was she played sax, and so we would have them on the Christmas show, and they were doing you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not horn choreography with all these fat ladies from Utah. It was fabulous. It was fabulous. That's entertainment.
Sure. Well, you did want to get to, like, you mentioned already that you went to the Star Wars holiday special. So it's such a legendary show. I remember as a kid how excited I was to get, see the cast of Star Wars was going to be on TV. I could not wait for it. I was glued to the TV set. So where did the idea for that come from, and how early in the process did you become involved?
Well, the idea came from George Lucas.
So George was behind it.
I think he and his team up at ILM in Marin realized Star Wars had been out a year and a half, and they were about to start shooting The Empire Strikes Back, and they wanted to stir the pot, and it was decided that a big network television special would be the way to do it, and so George had these. He told me he had 10 stories worked up, and he had 6 of them were going to be movies, and then he had 4 others, and he sold them off into different areas. And the last one standing was this idea of the Wookiees on their home planet, and he sold it to CBS as an original musical. And I really thought that he believed that it would be a musical, but I also thought that if he really thought it was going to be a musical, he would not have sold them an idea where the lead characters could not sing or dance or speak in any known language. I mean, I've always said they sound like fat people having orgasms. Trust me, I know. This is what they speak. And they it was before subtitles. You couldn't have subtitles. And the joke now is I know Lupita Nyong'o, and I said her entire roles in the Star Wars movies are subtitled. She speaks in Kashyyyk or some phantom language. But back then CBS said, "Oh no, they won't read subtitles." It was 1977. They're not going to read subtitles. So we had to have people translating. We had to have people translating everything. So we wrote in other characters, and that was where CBS got to put in network stars like B. Arthur and Harvey Korman and Art Carney and Cher, who was supposed to be booked it, bagged it, and Diane Carroll came in and did it.
I didn't know Cher was supposed to do it. Wow.
Yeah, it was originally Cher. So because they were all CBS stars, and that was the notion. And I was brought aboard with a raft of variety show people to put together this variety special. And George came down from Marin and looked at all of us and thought, "Oi, hey, what have I gotten into?" I think because we had a great meeting with him, but he was really trying to explain the whole thing, Star Wars for us. And I always have to say when I tell these stories that this was before Star Wars became the Scientology of the nerds. It was a big summer picture. It was a blockbuster, and but no one knew it was going to be forever or have the impact it did. And that didn't happen until after the first 3 movies, when George kind of stepped away, and the internet came in. First video came in, home video, and then the internet, and all of these people turned Star Wars into something else, to the point where George came back and did the back 3 movies he had always planned on. But so people people didn't take rabid offense at the thing, because it was, who knew it was going to be a one-off. After the Empire, it became clear that it was a franchise. So we didn't take it all that seriously.
Mhm.
And certainly the budget reflected that. I mean, we couldn't do what Star Wars did with the budget we had. I mean, everything was painted backdrops, and the one thing that remains of the show for the nerds is Boba Fett,
Right,
which
yeah.
was Boba Fett. George could not get a full-length feature greenlit of this animated Boba Fett, so he had Nelvana do a 10-minute or however long it was thing, and it served to introduce Boba Fett, and that's what most people remember for, and Life Day, which kind of was a joke for you. He finally let Lego do a Life Day thing when they did their special. But once he realized what he was up against, he went back to Marin, and we would get cryptic notes from him. But I mean, he turned it over to a director, a guy named David Akumba, who was a wonderful out of Toronto. And he was fired after a few days shooting, and it really became Steve Binder, who did Elvis in Hawaii. Steve came back, and the comeback special he had done for Elvis. So it was a real variety show roster, and George was washing his hands of it already.
So you said you got notes from George. Did you have to run everything past him, or did you just have the freedom to do whatever you wanted?
That's a very interesting question. We had to run things past him that affected the Star Wars universe. We didn't want to do anything that would be contrary to what happened. I mean, Art Carney played an intergalactic Tupperware salesman who was also in the Resistance. And so he had to know certain things about the Resistance that he couldn't reveal this, that, or the other thing. We had to check with George on those kinds of things. But no, he once he turned it over to CBS, it was a done deal.
That's what I was wondering, because one of the things I just watched it again this week, and the Diane Carroll part just like blew my mind actually too. It's like, but
mine too. When I look back at it, because it's kind of like softcore porn.
Right, that's exactly it.
George would come in with a virtual reality helmet, which was unknown at the time, and it plugged into your dreams. And so we had the grandpa Wookiee, the horny old Wookiee, silverback Wookiee, put it on, and he saw Diane Carroll, who was doing a very provocative dance.
Sure.
Maybe that's why Cher quit when she found out what it was. We never discussed it, but I think it was for another reason altogether. I think it was a medical thing, but Diane jumped into it. I mean, she was so elegant, and I think she just wanted to do something ridiculous and sexy, and she wasn't getting offered that kind of stuff. So that's why she did it. And we were great friends for years and years and years. And I kept saying, this was the first interracial, interspecies romance on network TV. Where's our NAACP Image Award? We broke down barriers. But she was so tasteful that when I tell people that she was in it, they don't believe me. I said, no, you have to actually look at it. There's, by the way, a documentary that I'm in. It's called A Disturbance in the Force, which is also available on, just dropped recently, which tells the whole story of Star Wars. Now, of course, my version of it will be in the book. Right. But it's very interesting because a lot of the people interviewed were not involved with the show, but they are Star Wars nerds. And they have a lot to say about the show.
Mm. Well, did Lucas express any apprehension about it before it aired?
No, I don't think so. I think he was in for a penny, in for a pound. I think he thought if it works and it sells more action figures, and it paves the way, because he was just starting the Empire, and the Empire would not be released until summer of the following year. I mean, we were doing it in whatever 78, and the Empire started shooting. The Empire wouldn't come out until 80 in the summer. So I think he was just looking for things to keep the thing on the bubble until the Empire. He could start beating the drum for the Empire.
I'm curious now because it's such a cult classic now. Like I said, it is available on YouTube, and like I mentioned, I watched it again. So at the time when it came out, were you upset with the reviews? And looking back on it now, how do you feel about it now? I mean,
well, I also say that if you were there for this, if you say you remember the '70s, you weren't there. I mean, we were all mostly all chemically altered. I mean, I embroider my own usage, and I love that to see. Vilanch, who admits to copious drug abuse, I don't, not copious. I mean, I used to joke that Carrie and Fisher and I were snorting the Sweet and Low because there was a white powder, and so we'd snort it. But that's an exaggeration. There were a lot of bongs and there were a lot of doobies and stuff like that. And so, but in the course of things, it was just another ridiculous television show. It was no more. It was no more ridiculous than Cole Porter in Paris, starring Connie Stevens. That noted interpreter of Cole Porter music. I mean, it was. There were Wayne Newton at SeaWorld, where he was doing a number with Shamu. I mean, they were. The idea was to make these things events so people would watch them. They were specials because they weren't the run-of-the-mill stuff. And at certain levels of ridiculousness. There was a show called Battle of the Network Stars.
Oh, I love that show.
Oh yeah,
literally. Where you had Charlene Tilton doing shot putting with Webster. I mean, it was insane. Insane. This was all coming out of the same brew, So it didn't bother me. It just and of course it went away. Like it was resuscitated. It really disappeared. It was resuscitated when the first three movies came out on home video, and people, and when the internet first showed up and somebody posted a bootleg of the special, and the people were shocked. The nerds were shocked to discover this had ever happened.
I believe yes. I remember that with all the outrage. And I remember watching it as a kid specifically. So yeah, do want to ask about
legend. And that was when Vanity Fair. They did a story on it, and they pursued George, and George finally said, "I'd like to get a hammer and destroy every copy." Which the quote has lived with him for 35 years.
Well, I do want to ask about a couple of other shows that you mentioned. One of them, the Sonny and Cher. I'm a huge Cher fan. I think I've tagged her on social media like close to 400 times now, asking for an interview. But what was it like working with her and on that show?
Well, I worked with them mostly on their act, and it was great. I mean, Sonny was the boss. Sonny knew what they were doing. There was a dynamic between the two of them. It was kind of like what Louis Prima and Keely Smith had done, or Gomez and Morticia, where you have the short kind of Latin guy who's going crazy, and the tall, willowy ice goddess who comes in with one zinger and just shuts him up totally, and is glamour. And so that was the template that we worked from. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was not so much fun when they had split and they realized they had to get back together, to do it again.
Ratings.
And the energy was not quite there. It was kind of like you were very happy that Ike and Tina never got back together. Well, but a similar thing happened. I mean, they went on their own career paths in each of those instances, but. But when Cher had her own show, George Slaughter, who I've done a million shows with, produced it, and she blossomed because she didn't have to worry about Sonny in every piece of material. She could do a whole lot of different stuff and do different characters and stuff like that. So,
well, when they did split, was it something like I'll take these writers and you take those, or
no? It all ended, and then they I think actually Sonny did a variety show of his own that didn't work, and they came back because they had so many debts together. And at the time, I don't think CBS wanted her alone, so they came back, and it didn't work out. And then she did her own show, if I remember the chronology.
Well, we already mentioned that I had the opportunity to work with Bette Davis, and we wanted to hear about your experiences with her.
Well, I got to know her because a friend of mine was dating Kath, who was her secretary, and an actor named Doug Barr, who was on The Fall Guy. He was the romantic younger guy with Lee Majors on The Fall Guy. And The Fall Guy, actually, just Ryan Reynolds has just done The Fall Guy movie is about to come out, ironically.
Oh,
yeah, look for it. And so Doug was dating Kath, and they were all living at Colonial House in West Hollywood. And I would, the first time I met her was in the garage. Because I was parking and she was leaving, and she knew who I was. I was doing the Midnight Special. We had a talk show segment on the Midnight Special, 1:00 in the morning, and she looked at me and she said, "Mr. Vilanch." I was kind of like, "What?" "I saw your show last night." "Oh, really?" She said. "Dreadful." And I said, "Well, it was the first one, Miss Davis. I mean, it gets better as we've taped more, and it gets better." And she said, "Well, it had nowhere to go but up." I thought, okay, that's my Bette Davis moment. And then Doug called me and said she wants to have dinner with you. So we went to the apartment, Doug and Kath, and we had dinner, and she was hilarious. I mean, she'd enjoyed a cocktail, and she told many wonderful stories. Most of us I can't repeat. and then I would see her off and on years later. And my favorite moment is because it's very her. There was a New Year's Eve party at Melissa Manchester's, who I'd known, who was one of Bette Midler's original singers, or original harlots. And she, of course, became a big star. And she had a New Year's Eve party. And Jose Ibert, who did her hair, was there. And his date was Bette Davis. He did her hair. And this was when she was in the period of, she was older, and she was wearing, there was a guy named, I think, Phil Kelly, who was famous for a designer. Buttons were his thing. He'd have a dress with big buttons on and a hat with big, and she was wearing one of those. And she's sitting in the wing chair and not moving, and just smoking and drinking. And I went over to her and I said, I knew her well enough, Betty. "Oh, Betty, I want to say something to you I've always wanted to say." And she kind of looked up at me, and I said, "Happy New Year's Eve."
Oh.
And she looked at me and she went, "Ha!" That was the entire reaction.
Oh, well, you worked for years in the Academy Awards, and you wrote, for many of them. So what's the process that goes into that? And do you have to write jokes for everyone? I mean, do the presenters give input at all, or just read what's written for them?
Well, it's everything. It depends on who's hosting the show. If the show is like this year, will be Jimmy Kimmel, and he will bring over his staff. And so whatever money is left in the budget will go to maybe a writer or two who has actually written on the show, not for the host. When Billy Crystal hosts it, he puts together his own team, and Steve Martin, Whoopi, that kind of stuff. But when the others do it, so it varies from year to year. So you write for the host, and you also write everything that the presenters say, and everybody has input. I mean, I remember the first time I did the show, I got a call from a guy who said, "I'm Goldie Hawn's trainer." She left the script at my studio, and she's not going to say this stuff. And I thought, I'm getting notes from the trainer.
Wow.
I said, could you have her holistic pet psychiatrist call me as soon as he reads it? Really, I need to get as much input as I possibly can. But everybody, it's on the Oscar show, and stuff lives with you. Think about Sally Field. You like me. I mean, 30 years later, she monetized it with a Visa commercial. But so everybody thinks, something that you casually say, this is back in the day when now everything is on social media now. Mm-hmm. But back in the day, if you said something on Letterman, they'd forget about it. But you said it on the Oscars, it could live with you forever because the audience was gigantic. So everybody is very concerned about what they're going to say. And so you wind up writing and rewriting right up until rehearsal. And then, of course, on the show night, you're rewriting the host because the host is following what's going on, and you want the show to be live and you want it to feel spontaneous when the host is out there. So you find things that you can comment on.
So, but you have people that just say, I'm not going to say that joke. It's just like,
all the time. Yeah. All the time. Or my favorite is when they say, I told them that wouldn't be funny. Or, when they have a misplaced trust in us. Or you try, it's very hard to write for actors who don't have a persona. I used to say, when somebody like Bette Midler or Billy Crystal, Robin Williams, they knew who they are when they're on stage. I used to say, Shirley MacLaine knows who she is. She knows who she was. So with her, but when somebody comes up like Keanu Reeves, he doesn't have a character. They think he is like Bill and Ted, or that he's the guy from The Matrix. He's not. And so to give him material to read in that voice is a mistake. But what voice does he have? So you have to find a common ground. Or in Johnny Depp's case, he said, "Well, I want to let's do this like Captain Jack Sparrow, or do one line of it like that, so you realize you're making fun of yourself." And he was very happy with that. So it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, similar type of question. Have there been people who got annoyed with you about jokes at their expense and complained to you afterwards?
Yeah, occasionally, but the Tony Awards, I'm the EGOT of award show writers. I've written the Emmys, the Grammys, the Oscars, and the Tonys. I'm not alone. There are a lot of us. But the Tony Awards one year were hosted by Rosie O'Donnell, and Raquel Welch was who had made a name. She had revived herself on Broadway, following Lauren Bacall into Woman of the Year, big musical. And she was now going to go into Victor Victoria, the musical, following Julie Andrews, which we all thought was sort of like kind of a fool's errand, because who's going to believe that she's a man? Raquel Welch. So there was a show on Broadway that season that was nominated called Steel Pier, which was about the marathon dancers in the 30s. And so Rosie came out and she said, Raquel Welch is going into Victor Victoria, and in her honor, they're changing the title of the show to Steel Pair. And it got a big laugh. And Raquel countered me at the ball afterwards and says, "Was that a tit joke?" And I said, "No, it was a balls joke."
No.
And then she laughed, and I thought, but no, I mean, the most extreme example was the Rob Lowe Snow White thing, but that's a whole book in itself, and it's in my book. There you go.
Okay. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure getting to talk to you. We're big fans, both of us. And again, it's such a treat, and you have many more stories. We'll look forward to the book, and welcome back anytime.
No more.
Yeah.
Hopefully newer.
Well, again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenmann. And again, a very special thanks to Bruce Vilanch. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.